Guys, welcome back to the James Bond Show with Krazy Kajeevie. I'm your host, the bad boy of James Bond. Now guys, this is part 2 of my article read on Scott Mendelson and basically why Scott Mendelson, as I call him, is a douchebag. So this is part 2. If you haven't seen part 1, check it out below, the video below. So, okay, now, before I get cracking on this, I want to let you guys know I've got a couple of exciting dissecting the directing videos coming up. I am going to do a bad scene that I've already got worked out, and I'm sorry, Pierce Brosnan fans, but it is from a Pierce Brosnan film. So that is a bad scene coming up from a Brosnan film. I also have a good scene coming up from a Brosnan film. Then I'm going to give the Brozza a bit of a breaker, and I am going to go to a classic good scene from Dr. No. So stay tuned for that. Yes, I know I've already done a Dr. No video, but this is worth going to. You guys are going to love these breakdowns. And thank you so much for the great feedback on them as well. And guys, thank you so much for the comments that you've left in the part 2 video of Scott Mendelson wanting a coloured James Bond. Here's the thing. When people write articles, you've got to look at their motives. You've got to check their motives. Are they doing it because of the real love, their love and understanding of the character for the franchise, be it Luke Skywalker, be it Harry Potter, be it Superman, Doctor Who, be it James Bond? Okay? Even in this article, as I read out the first part last night, Scott Mendelson even talked about a female Indiana Jones. You don't get a more manly character, probably 2 of the most manly characters ever put to cinema in the history of cinema would be Indiana Jones, right, and James Bond. They would be 2 in the top 5. You'd probably have Rambo in there and maybe, you know, an Arnold Schwarzenegger character, right? Okay, let's get into this. With that being said, the franchise, again, took the property to new commercial heights. So he's talking about the Daniel Craig era here with Casino Royale, becoming the first 600 million plus 007 and Skyfall earning a sky-high 304 million domestic and $1.18 billion worldwide in 2002. Even Spectre, warts and all, earned 200 million domestic and 881 million global, right alongside The Hunger Games, Mockingjay Part 2 and Star Wars The Force Awakens. The whole is James Bond relevant argument has been going on at least since 1993, with Entertainment Weekly argued for the likes of Sharon Stone or Wesley Snipes taking the role. And yet the films arrive as is to rapturous commercial reception. Well, there you go. Doesn't that show you that when hack entertainment shows like Entertainment Weekly, be it magazines, shows or whatever, or hack people like Scott Mendelson, who again is contradicting himself, putting out a good point then a bad point. I mean, imagine if James Bond was rebooted in 1995. You've gone from Timothy Dalton into hard-edged classic Bond films, great Bond films. Even at the time, they were great Bond films. And The Living Daylights, where this twat talks about Timothy Dalton not being great at the box office, etc. The Living Daylights was the highest grossing Bond film of all time up until 1987. Okay? View to a Kill was around 153, 154 million. The Living Daylights was 197. So when License to Kill then 2 years later only made around 150, I think it was 156, 159 million, right? It was up against massive juggernauts and suddenly little kids couldn't go and see it with their dads. That's got nothing to do with Timothy Dalton or the value and the quality of the hard-edged film. And they had to go in a harder direction when they're up against films like Predator, Rambo, Lethal Weapon. They had to go harder. They had to get tougher because that's what audiences wanted. And that's bringing back the essence of Ian Fleming's James Bond from the novels as well. So when companies come out and they recommend a Wesley Snipes, well, that's not Ian Fleming's James Bond. When they recommend Sharon Stone, that's not Ian Fleming's James Bond. And what audience back in the 90s would they have been targeting? What audience would you target now? Seriously, realistically. What audience would you be targeting if you cast a Keira Knightley as James Bond, a Gillian Anderson as James Bond? And like I said last night, unless they have a vaginal tuck or a penis added to them, they can't be James Bond. Because let me tell you, okay, for the mentally impaired, a boy has a penis, a girl has a vagina. That is biology. Now, if you think against that, then you need to go and check your mental welfare. Because I don't care what the Democrat virtue signaling, PC correct police think. Those people have psychological issues. A man is a man and a boy is a boy. You can't change the gender of James Bond. You don't see guys. How often do you see guys, and even yourself, Scott Mendelson, how often do you push for Lara Croft Tomb Raider to have a penis attached on, to become a man? Why aren't you talking about Eddie Murphy, Wesley Snipes, Tom Cruise, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Tom Hardy to become the next Lara Croft? Why aren't you doing that? It's not in your best interest, is it? No. Because your best interest, according to you, Scott Mendelson, is you have a left-wing agenda. Now, when you look at, and I'm going to get deep now, and this is why I told you all to stay tuned for part 2. Don't go anywhere, because right now we are going to get lit. Okay, the Black Lives Matter movement. Let me give you the truth of it. If you go into the Black Lives Matter, their website, and you read their manifesto, within 5 lines of their manifesto, their agenda, their mission statement, Black Lives Matter state categorically that they are there to destroy the family unit, the biological family unit, the nucleus of family. What God created, their mission is to destroy it and have the full acceptance of the LGBTQXYZ alphabet people. Now tell me, if their plight is for people like George Floyd, or even before that, Rodney King, etc., if their plight is purely for black people who are victimized, why do they go straight to an LGBT agenda and attack what the family nucleus is? The best thing for black families, Asian families, white families is to have one mum, one dad, and brothers and sisters and beautiful children brought into that family, and not executed, murdered, butchered, slaughtered, ripped out by abortion. And abortion is a made-up word, just like conspiracy. Conspiracy theory is made up to people that reveal and show what the governments are really up to, especially now with this current pandemic. So what Black Lives Matter are doing, do you wonder why they're attacking statues? They are attacking statues because Black Lives Matter are funded by George Soros, who is a Luciferian elite pushing for a new world order. Henry Kissinger, his best buddy, pushing for a new world order. Go and look up the footage that lost George Bush Sr. the election back in 92 when he said, and now we can have a new world order. People didn't like that, especially the Christian sects, who normally would have been Republican supporters, didn't like that because they knew what George Bush Sr. was talking about when he talked about a new world order. So if you have a world filled with statues, Lincoln, who freed the slaves, who was against the Democrats that were pro having slaves, all right? When they get rid of these statues, what do? They get rid of the old world and then they create their new world. When they get rid of Luke Skywalker as a male role model hero, when they get rid of James Bond as a male role model hero, they are getting rid of the old order and they are bringing in part of a new order. And that new order is to cause division, promote coloured actors into roles owned, loved by white characters. And you don't see white people, Indian people, a lot of black people. You don't see us championing. Well, you don't see any black people, but you don't see us championing for Blade to be played by Brad Pitt. Brad Pitt's a good actor, great screen charisma, but we're not calling for it. If Scott Mendelson put up a poll for everyone on Twitter to say, hey, who do you think would be the best new Blade? And Scott listed a bunch of actors. Say he lists 8 actors. I can promise you that every one of those 8 actors would be a black actor. There is no way Scott Mendelson would nominate a white actor to take a black role. Let's keep going with this article. Okay, what does this have to do with a minority actor playing James Bond in James Bond 26? Well, there was a time when I figured that such a thing shouldn't happen. No, you didn't, Scott. That's a lie. After all, if the 007 films were going to continue to critique themselves and exist as self-deconstructions, then it might be challenging to do such a thing when the very idea of a minority actor would qualify as a kind of aspirational triumph. How, Scott? That's the funny thing is you don't actually go on to say how casting a coloured actor would be an aspirational triumph. Choosing a non-white Bond would require Eon. See how he doesn't? Like I said, he doesn't actually say how it would be a triumph. Would require Eon, MGM, the Broccolis and company to try to mesh the whole, quotations here, being James Bond isn't as fun as you think mentality with a yay, there's a guy like Henry Golding or Dev Patel looking fabulous in the tux as he seduces women and shoots bad guys. Variable by default. The notion of, in brackets, random example, I don't know who he's talking about here, Gugu Mathu Raw, playing the role would be aspirational by default. How would it be aspirational? Because this Indian guy that... I'm a film fanatic and a bit of a walking cinephile, if I may say so myself, and I've never heard of Gugu Mathu Raw, and why, as a Bond fan of, 30 odd years, would I want to see him playing James Bond? How would that be aspirational to me? How would it respect Ian Fleming's work? How would it respect the Ian Fleming Foundation? How would it respect all the James Bond fans out there? How would it be aspirational for the James Bond fans out there? It's more virtue signaling from a bloke who doesn't give a rat's ass about James Bond and the foundations of James Bond and what he means culturally to the fans. And not just white fans, black fans, Indian fans, any fans. You don't care. It wouldn't be impossible to mesh the two. Even Will Smith's Underappreciated spies in disguise. Here we go. Another example of a film that no one went and saw. Could be a clue in that. Was as much of a self-commentary on the very idea of the violent action hero as any post-Dalton 007 movie. However, it would present a challenge and a course alteration. That's not a course alteration. It is a complete redo. It's a reimagination. It's not James Bond. So what changed my mind? During the first month of quarantine, I've rewatched all the 24 official Bond movies, along with countless big picture observations. In brackets, the majority of 007 hookups are with women who are merely sexing him up as part of a murder plot. Well, that's crap. Have a look at Tracy. Have a look at Vespa. Have a look at Madeline. Right? There's a bit more than just a hookup and a sex up, Scott. And Daniel Craig's movies played even more redundant than usual immediately following the Pierce Brosnan era. Skyfall was always all 4 Brosnan movies in one blockbuster package. The Craig era, quality notwithstanding, now plays like the Amazing Spider-Man. This is his favourite word, by the way. I've gone and read his other reviews and articles, and he just keeps using this word. It's a grimdark remake trying to convince you that it was unlike the last incarnation. How the hell was the Daniel Craig era the Pierce Brosnan era rolled up? How? How was Skyfall? How was Skyfall? He specifically says Skyfall. How the hell was Skyfall like the Pierce Brosnan era rolled into one? You have an incredible imagination. It sucks, but it's incredible because it's incredibly bad how much your imagination and your thought process sucks, Scott. The problem that casting a non-white actor as James Bond solves. Now he's going to solve some world problems like hunger and everything else here. At the risk of falling into the same James Bond risks becoming culturally irrelevant trap, I'm not sure the franchise can survive another era that operates as a deconstructionist, guilt-ridden self-commentary of itself. James Bond has survived through 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and now because Bond's gone with different eras. But the tropes have stayed there. When you keep the feminism, or get rid of the feminism, when you keep the chauvinism, when you keep parts of the humour, the action, and you keep the fact he's all about king and country, that is the essence of James Bond. And that never has to go. So Bond never has to change. And when the audiences are still showing up, making like Skyfall over $1 billion, then you really think that the audience wants massive change from that? Commentary of itself. Whatever the next variation is going to be, perhaps the James Bond movies should revert to being at least somewhat fantastical and escapist. They are, you douchebag. If you can make quality, dead serious horror movies after Scream and Cabin in the Woods, you can make non-winking but non-angsty 007 movies 3 decades after GoldenEye and Austin Powers' International Man of Mystery. However, it won't be easy to make a comparatively celebratory, wish-fulfillment James Bond movie, especially in a world where glorified supervillains run many of the world's largest governments. That's about the only intelligent thing you've actually said in this entire article, that supervillains do run the world. But Trump for 2020. Trump. One answer lies in casting an actor or actress, see here he goes again pushing the actress thing, demographically speaking, to play James Bond would constitute an aspirational triumph of social progress. James Bond, under Ian Fleming's creation and the fandom, are not here for social progress. Look what social progress has done to this world, Scott. Look at America ripping and tearing itself apart. And the UK is not much far off, let alone Australia, here where I live, where people are getting tired, sick to death of this social progress, ripping apart what we love and the foundations. You can't have your beliefs anymore. It's disgusting. Let's keep going, guys. If that sounds cynical, well, I'm an adult, and I trust most of my readers are as well. So now he's pulling the whole adult thing. Oh, it's an adult to bring this social progressive change around. Play the old adult card, why don't you, Scotty? There would be something cynical about Eon and friends attempting to shield themselves from criticisms of the James Bond formula, or at least trying to give themselves an excuse to make James Bond a wish fulfillment escapist adventure again by casting a man or, here we go again, you know what he's about to say, don't you? A man or a woman colour in a role defined as a prototypical white male power fantasy. See, that's the thing. What Scott and these nutcases, what these fruitcakes want to do is get rid of the white male power fantasy. What this douchebag has to realise is he's not just a white male power fantasy. James Bond is a male power fantasy. And even though the men want to be like him, of all races, colours and creeds, the women want to be with him too. Think about the women James Bond fans out there too, Scott. However, under this thinking, the need to justify the progressive casting would be a case of the actor doing a favour for the franchise as opposed to the franchise bestowing the role to a non-white actor as a treat. However good the individual films happen to be, and I like most of them, he says, 25 years of James Bond, is James Bond still relevant? It's more than 25 years, douchebag, unless you're talking just from GoldenEye. And or being James Bond kind of stinks is long enough. Oh dear. From 62 to 89, the James Bond franchise was mostly uncontested in the realm of the top tier blockbuster action, running into competition only in the 1980s, beginning with the Indiana Jones movies, which ironically came about because Steven Spielberg wanted to direct a 007 film, instead teamed up with George Lucas to make an American institution. An American variation. From 1995 to, hopefully in brackets, 2020, Pierce Brosnan and Daniel Craig confronted new threats and rival Hollywood franchises in a constant assertion of cultural relevance. I don't know what the next 25 years will offer, but there needs to be a nudge back into escapism and fantasy. You know what? We don't all disagree with you there, but these Bond films, especially when you have, and just a potential spoiler for anyone watching this, it's not a spoiler, but for No Time to Die, it's just potentially what the villain could be using as a weapon, so it's not a big spoiler. But the bad guy Safin in No Time to Die is an algae dude. He's using algae, sea algae for some reason, some way. So if that's not fantasy, I don't know what is. And there's obviously elements of cloning in the film, so it's still fantastical. But there needs to be a nudge back into escapism fantasy. Maybe the easiest way to justify a no guilt, no shame, no problem era is to offer a not, this is what he says in quotations, not a white guy, James Bond, in brackets, or Jane Bond, saving the world from rich white guys and having a hell of a time doing it. That is the part I told you all to stick around for. Did you just read? Did you just hear what I read? I'm going to read it again. Get on this guy's Twitter page and blast him, because he is showing himself for the ass-kissing, knee-bending sockhole that he is. He's instantly making a white guy the villain in the next Bond film, and a black male or a black female the hero and the victim. You ready for this? Maybe the easiest way to justify a no guilt, no shame, no problem era is to offer a not a white guy James Bond or Jane Bond saving the world from rich white guys and having a hell of a time doing it. If that isn't racist, disgusting, and pathetic, then I don't know what is. And tell you what, Scotty, if you're so ashamed of white people and white heritage and you just see us all as villains, I've got an idea for you. Go down to your local paint store. Now, if you send me your PayPal details, I will send you the money personally. Go into your local paint store, Scotty, buy the thickest can of black paint you can buy with the biggest brush. Go paint yourself black. I will pay for the paint. Paint yourself black, go out onto a freeway, hold up a sign saying, I am an ass-kissing, virtue-signaling, Black Lives Matter suckhole. Do that and that'll make us all happy. Guys, make sure you leave in the comments below your thoughts on this video. Have I got it right? Has Krazy gone too crazy? And don't forget, please like, and more than anything, please subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends and report it. Because have you noticed something else? Or share it so I can report it. Have you noticed something else? Do you see David Zashitsky at the Bond Experience? Do you see Joe Darlington? Do you see Calvin Dyson? Do you even see Dutch Bond fan? Well, we don't see him anymore anyway. Do you see James Bond? Actually, now I'm naming channels that no one watches anyway, like James Bond Canada or the Bond Complex. No one's really heard of them. But do you see any of these channels? Or James Bond Radio Gaga, more like it. Do you see these guys talking about this? This article is all over the internet. They see it, they know it's there, and they are choosing not to talk about it. You guys can't run and ignore this stuff for much longer, and that's why the James Bond show is the ultimate show for James Bond, because here you're always going to get the James Bond you love defended. Guys, like, subscribe. Till next time, keep on bonding and say hi to your mum for me.